It was the kind of night I thought we'd remember forever. The air was thick with laughter, the hum of conversation, and the scent of grilling food mingling with the warmth of a perfect summer evening. Our backyard was alive. Friends diving into the pool, people dancing barefoot on the grass, and Kate, my wife, flashing that smile that seemed to light up the whole evening. It was our 5-year anniversary, a milestone, and Kate had insisted on a celebration big enough to reflect how far we'd come. I couldn't say no to her enthusiasm, nor did I want to. We danced, jumped into the pool with our clothes still on, and let the alcohol do its work, loosening the edges of the night, softening the world just enough. It was perfect. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. But there was something else, something that started off as a whisper in the back of my mind and grew louder as the night wore on. Kate kept hanging out with one guy in particular, someone I didn't know well. She'd mentioned him once or twice before, a friend from work or something like that. I hadn't really paid attention at the time, distracted by life's usual noise. But tonight, there was no avoiding it. He was always there, right by her side, tall, clean-cut, and full of that easy charm that grated on me the more I watched them together. At first, I pushed the thoughts away. It was our night, our party, and I didn't want to cloud it with stupid insecurities. Kate was just being Kate, social, fun, and always the center of attention. That's why I loved her. But the longer they laughed together, standing just a little too close, the more that gnawing discomfort took root. I knocked back another drink, determined not to let my paranoia ruin what should have been one of the happiest nights of our lives. By the time evening fell and the pool lights cast a soft glow over the water, the party was in full swing. It was around 8 p.m., the perfect balance between buzzed and reckless, and everyone was too deep into the night to care about anything but having a good time. I was dancing, trying to keep the fun going, when I realized I hadn't seen Kate for a while. The music thumped so loud, it was easy to lose track of people, but still, where was she? I felt that familiar twinge in my gut again, but I shook it off. She's probably inside grabbing a drink or freshening up. No big deal. But as the minutes ticked by, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I stopped mid-dance and looked around, hoping to spot her in the crowd, laughing like always, but there was no sign of her. That guy was gone too. A flash of heat shot through me, and I made my way back toward the house. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was nothing, but the silence she'd left in her absence felt too loud, too unsettling. I headed toward the kitchen first, calling her name over the roar of the music, but no answer. A few of our friends were gathered around, laughing and pouring drinks, but none of them had seen her either. I tried to shake it off, telling myself she'd just slipped upstairs for a breather. Still, something didn't sit right. Our house was big, 3 stories, plenty of places to get lost in, especially with a party going on. But the more I moved through the rooms on the first floor, the more uneasy I became. She wasn't in the kitchen, the dining room, or even the living room, where a few people had crashed onto couches to take a break from the party outside. I kept calling her name, louder this time, but she couldn't hear me over the blasting music. I started up the stairs, my mind playing tricks on me, running wild with half-formed thoughts I didn't want to acknowledge. Kate was fine. She had to be fine. But each empty room I checked only added weight to the tight knot forming in my chest. Maybe she'd gone up to our bedroom to change into something dry after jumping in the pool. Maybe she just needed a moment to herself. But now I wasn't sure. The party was still raging downstairs, but the silence inside our home felt wrong, like a bad omen. I climbed to the second floor, checking every room, my heart beginning to pound in my chest. People filled the guest rooms, laughing, completely unaware of my rising anxiety. Where was she? I decided to go up to the 3rd floor, where our bedroom was. As I walked, the music, the laughter, everything seemed so far away. Only the sound of my own footsteps echoed in the corridor, and when I heard the sound of that, this uneasy feeling turned into full-blown fear. I moved down the hallway toward our bedroom, my steps growing heavier with each one I took. The further I went, the louder that noise became, muffled at first, but unmistakable. Laughter, soft groans. It wasn't the kind of sound you hear from someone changing their clothes or fixing their makeup. No, this was different. More intimate, more raw. As I stood outside the door, my hand hovering over the knob, I froze. It wasn't just my heart that dropped. It was like my entire body had been plunged into ice water. I heard a voice, a man's voice, too clear to be mistaken. His tone was low, rough, filled with something vile. And then, a second later, the words followed, vulgar, sharp, cutting through my very soul like a jagged blade. Oh yeah, F asterisk 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 me harder. You be asterisk 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 asterisk. For a moment, I thought I was having a nightmare. One of those surreal, horrific dreams that pulls you under, no matter how much you want to wake up. But this wasn't a dream. This was real. The world around me tilted, the hallway spinning as if the ground had been ripped out from under me. I staggered back, my mind screaming at me to turn around, leave, pretend I hadn't heard a thing. But my legs moved on their own, the disbelief and rage building inside me, choking me. My hand gripped the doorknob, shaking with a violent fury I'd never felt before. It was locked. Without thinking, without even caring, I threw my weight into the door. The first attempt didn't do much, just a dull thud against the heavy wood. But I wasn't stopping. I kicked it harder, putting every ounce of pain, anger, and betrayal into that kick, until finally, the door flew open with a deafening crash. And there they were. The image burned itself into my mind, searing through my chest like a hot iron, branding me with a pain I'd never imagined possible. Kate was there, completely naked, her back to me, bent over the bed with that guy from earlier standing behind her, just as bare, his hands gripping her hips. I felt something inside me snap, something primal and uncontrollable. My vision blurred, all sense of reason drowned out by the roar in my head. I was on him before I could even register what I was doing, my body moving faster than my mind could process. I lunged at him, screaming, "What the hell are you doing?" He didn't even have time to react. My fist connected with his face before he could defend himself, the sickening crunch of bone meeting bone echoing in the small room. We went down hard, crashing into the nightstand, knocking over a lamp that shattered on the floor. Kate's screams pierced the air, desperate, broken, but all I could see was red. He tried to push me off, but I was relentless, fueled by something darker than rage. I hit him again, and again, my fists slamming into his face, his chest, anywhere I could reach. I didn't care about anything else at that moment. Didn't care about the party still going on downstairs. Didn't care about the consequences. Didn't even care about the pain in my knuckles as they split open from the force of the blows. All I wanted was to make him hurt as much as I was hurting. Kate's cries grew louder, her voice hoarse from the strain. She grabbed at my arm, pulling me back, pleading with me to stop. "Please stop. You're going to kill him. Just stop." But her words only fueled the fire inside me. I threw her off, her naked body collapsing onto the bed in a heap as I turned back to him, barely hearing her sobs through the ringing in my ears. The guy, now bloodied and struggling beneath me, managed to get in a punch of his own, landing it squarely on my jaw. The pain shot through my head, but I barely flinched. It only pushed me further. I pinned him down, my hands gripping his throat, squeezing as hard as I could. He gasped, his eyes wide with panic, hands clawing at mine, trying to pry me off, but I wasn't letting go. Not yet. Not until he knew the full weight of what he had done. Kate was sobbing now, her voice trembling as she begged us to stop. "Please, just stop. You're going to kill him, please." Her words finally broke through the haze, cutting through the madness that had taken over. I let go of his throat, watching as he collapsed, gasping for air, coughing and spitting blood onto the floor. My chest heaved, my fists trembling with the effort it took not to finish what I had started. Kate pulled herself off the bed, her face streaked with tears, her body shaking uncontrollably. She looked at me with wide, terrified eyes, like I had become someone she no longer recognized. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "stop." For a moment, everything was silent. The music downstairs still blared, but in that room, it was like time had stopped. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, blood, and betrayal. My heart pounded in my chest, but the adrenaline was wearing off. leaving behind only the cold, hollow ache of what I'd just witnessed. Kate, still sobbing, fell to her knees beside me, reaching out as if to touch me, to comfort me, but I recoiled. I couldn't look at her, couldn't bear the sight of her, naked and broken, a reminder of everything that had just shattered between us. The weight of it all pressed down on me, suffocating. For a few seconds, I thought I had won. I hovered over him, panting, my fists still clenched and trembling. His face was swollen, blood dripping from his nose, and his chest heaved with labored breaths. Kate, sobbing beside the bed, looked up at me like I was a stranger. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the muffled thump of the music from downstairs. Then everything changed. It happened so fast, I didn't even have time to react. His eyes, wild and desperate, flicked up toward me with a dark intensity one hadn't seen before. Suddenly, it was like something snapped inside him, like a switch had been flipped. He moved with a speed and violence that caught me completely off guard, his hands shooting up and shoving me so hard in the chest that I staggered back, losing my balance. I hit the ground hard, the breath knocked out of me. For a moment, I lay there, stunned, the world spinning around me. Before I could gather my bearings, I heard a sharp, deafening crash, like glass shattering. A split second later, pain exploded in the back of my head. It felt like my skull had been cracked open, a white-hot flash of agony that blinded me. I realized what had happened only as I tasted the bitter metallic tang of blood in my mouth. He had smashed a wine bottle over my head. Everything became a blur after that. I tried to get up, but the room tilted violently, and my body wouldn't respond the way it should. I heard Kate scream my name, but it was distant, like I was underwater. Then came the next blow, a heavy kick to my ribs that sent a shockwave of pain through my entire body. I gasped for air, but all I could taste was blood. Through the haze, I saw him, naked, snarling, his face twisted with pure rage. He swung the broken neck of the wine bottle in his hand, his knuckles white as he gripped it like a weapon. And then came another kick, this time to my face. The room spun, and I could hear my own screams echoing somewhere in the distance. But they didn't feel like mine. The last thing I remember was the sickening crunch of bone as he brought the bottle down on my head again, the jagged glass slicing through my scalp. Everything went dark after that. The world dissolved into nothingness, and all I could hear was the dull thudding of my own heartbeat, slower and slower, until even that faded away. When I opened my eyes, the world was a blur of sterile white. It took me a moment to realize where I was. The soft beeping of machines, the faint smell of disinfectant. I was in a hospital bed. My entire body felt like it had been hit by a freight train. My head throbbed with such intensity that every breath sent a wave of nausea crashing over me. I blinked, trying to make sense of it all, but everything hurt too much. My arm was wrapped in a cast, my chest tightly bandaged, and my face felt swollen and raw. I could barely move. Each breath was agony. And then, through the fog of pain, I heard a familiar voice. "Oh my God, you're awake." I turned my head, my vision still blurry. Kate was sitting beside me, her face streaked with tears, her hands shaking as they clutched mine. Her eyes were red and puffy, her lips trembling. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "I thought I'd lost you," she sobbed, leaning over and hugging me gently, careful not to touch the parts of me that were covered in bruises and bandages. I stared at the ceiling, my heart pounding with rage and confusion. Everything hurt, but nothing hurt as much as the realization that she had been with him. That man, while I was bleeding on the floor, nearly killed by someone she had brought into our home. I struggled to form words, my throat dry and my voice weak. "Why?" I croaked, my chest tightening with every word. "Why did you cheat on me?" Kate's sobs grew louder, her body shaking against mine as she collapsed into a heap of guilt and shame. She gripped my hand, but I couldn't bear to feel her touch. It was like poison. "I don't know," she cried, her voice breaking with every word. "I don't remember why. I was so drunk. I didn't mean for it to happen, I swear. All I remember is him hitting you, and then you were on the ground, and I I didn't know what to do. I'm so sorry. Her words came out in a rush, desperate and pleading, but they barely registered. All I could see was that moment in the bedroom, her naked, her body entwined with his, and the sound of his voice, that vulgar, mocking tone that still echoed in my mind. I turned away from her, my heart splintering with every sob she let out. I don't want to see you, I whispered, my voice raw. Get out, please, she begged, but I couldn't look at her. Couldn't hear any more of her apologies. Every word felt like another dagger being twisted in my chest. Leave, I rasped, closing my eyes, willing her to disappear. She stayed there, crying and pleading for what felt like an eternity, but eventually she left. And when she did, the dam broke. As soon as the door closed behind her, I let out a choked sob, the tears coming in a flood I couldn't control. My body shook violently, the pain, the betrayal, the shame, it all poured out in a torrent of uncontrollable anguish. I was utterly shattered, crumbling under the weight of everything that had happened. All I could think about was how it had come to this. How had we gone from celebrating our love to this nightmare? And why had I let it happen? I regretted everything. The party, trusting her. 14 days. That's how long I spent in the hospital, surrounded by sterile walls and the quiet hum of medical machines. 14 days of waking up every morning, feeling the weight of betrayal crushing my chest before the pain in my body even registered. My arm broken, my ribs bruised. The concussion left me in a fog, but nothing compared to the storm that raged inside me every time I thought about Kate. She came to visit me almost every day. At first, I didn't want to see her. I turned my face away, biting back the flood of anger and sadness every time she entered the room. She'd sit beside me, her eyes swollen from crying, whispering apologies that I refused to listen to. I couldn't stand the sight of her, not after what I had seen. The betrayal, the pain, it was too much. Every time she walked through that door, it felt like another wound being opened. Please, just let me explain, she'd beg. But every word only felt like poison. Leave, I'd mutter, my voice hoarse and brittle, like the shell of the man I used to be. And each time, she left, her sobs echoing in the empty hallways behind her. Finally, after 2 weeks, they discharged me. The physical wounds had begun to heal, but the scars inside were festering. When the nurse wheeled me to the front of the hospital, my thoughts were a twisted mess of bitterness and pain. I didn't tell Kate I was coming home. I didn't want her there when I walked through the door. Didn't want to see her face the moment I returned to what was supposed to be our home. When I entered the house, the silence was unnerving. The place that once buzzed with life now felt cold and hollow. I could hear the faint sound of crying from the living room. I followed it, my heart pounding with the weight of everything I had bottled up inside for the past 14 days. There she was, Kate, sitting on the couch, her face buried in her hands, sobbing quietly. She didn't notice me at first. The sight of her like that, broken and guilty, should have brought me some kind of twisted satisfaction. But all I felt was a tidal wave of anger crashing through me. I snapped. All the emotions I had been burying for 2 weeks surged to the surface, exploding out of me in a torrent of rage I couldn't control. I screamed at her, words tumbling out in a fury I couldn't contain. How could you do this to me? I roared, my voice cracking with the weight of everything I had kept locked inside. How could you let that man into our home? Into our bed? Kate looked up, startled, her face pale and streaked with tears. She tried to speak, to explain, but I didn't give her the chance. I let it all out. Every thought, every doubt, every ounce of pain. My voice trembled as I yelled at her, the sound of my own fury rattling through the house. I loved you, Kate. I shouted, my chest heaving with every breath. I trusted you with everything, and you threw it all away for what? For him? She didn't try to defend herself this time. She knew there was no excuse. She knew she was guilty. Her eyes filled with more tears, and her voice broke as she whispered, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't know why I did it. I made a horrible mistake. Her confession hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. For a moment, the weight of it all pulled me down, and I collapsed into a chair, my hands shaking. The physical pain I had endured was nothing compared to the emotional torment tearing through me. But even as I sat there, the rage didn't leave me. I couldn't come to terms with the fact that he had beaten me. That man had taken something from me, my dignity, my sense of security, everything I thought I knew about my marriage. And I wasn't going to let him walk away unscathed. I knew where he lived. Kate had told me once in passing when she thought he was just some insignificant colleague. I grabbed my car keys without another word, ignoring Kate's pleading voice as she begged me not to go. I didn't care. I needed to do something, to take back control, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain he had inflicted on me. His house was in a wealthy part of town, big, sprawling, the kind of place that screamed comfort and privilege. When I pulled up, I saw him outside, tinkering with his car, completely unaware of the storm headed his way. His wife and kids were in the yard, laughing, playing. It made me sick. He didn't deserve that happiness. The moment he looked up and saw me, his face paled. He knew why I was there. Without a word, I charged at him, my fists swinging before I could even register what I was doing. He barely had time to defend himself before I was on him, pummeling him with everything I had. His screams echoed in the air, the sound of his pleas just a blur in my ears as my fists connected with his body, again and again. I could hear his wife screaming, calling for help, but I didn't stop. I beat him mercilessly, the same way he had beaten me. His blood splattered across the driveway, mixing with the oil and grime from his car, and all I could think about was how much I had suffered because of him. "Is this what you wanted?" I screamed, my voice hoarse, raw from the force of my anger. "Is this what you were after?" He didn't fight back this time. He just lay there, whimpering, his face a bloody mess, his body curled up in a pathetic attempt to shield himself from the blows. And for a moment, I felt a sick sense of satisfaction. But then I saw them, his family, his wife, standing there with her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. His kids, frozen with fear, their innocent eyes wide as they watched their father get beaten into the ground. It was like a cold wave crashing over me, extinguishing the fire in an instant. The realization hit me with a brutal clarity. This wasn't justice. This wasn't healing anything. I was no better than him. I had become the monster I had sworn I wouldn't be. I stood up, my chest heaving, my fists trembling with adrenaline. His wife rushed to him, sobbing, as I backed away. If it hadn't been for them, his wife, his children, I don't know what I would have done. I might have killed him. I left him there broken and bleeding on the ground and drove home, my hands shaking so badly I could barely keep the car on the road. The rage had burned out, leaving only a hollow emptiness in its wake. When I walked into the house, Kate was in the kitchen, cooking dinner like nothing had happened. The smell of food filled the air, but I couldn't breathe. My hands were shaking, covered in blood, his blood. It was like I was outside of my own body, watching myself unravel. And then it all hit me, harder than before. The weight of everything, the betrayal, the violence, the emptiness. I snapped. In a fit of rage, I started throwing everything I could get my hands on, plates, glasses, anything within reach. The sound of shattering glass filled the air, but it did nothing to quiet the storm inside me. Kate screamed, begging me to stop, but I couldn't. I wanted to destroy everything, to tear down everything we had built because it all felt like a lie. The rage, the grief, the pain, it consumed me, leaving nothing behind. A few days passed after I had beaten him to a bloody pulp. I knew the damage I had caused, his broken arm, the bruises that would leave scars, and the injuries that would remind him of me every time he looked in the mirror. But what haunted me most wasn't his pain. It was mine. The guilt settled in almost immediately, and I couldn't shake it. Every waking moment, I thought of what I had done, how far I had let myself fall. I could hardly look at my own reflection without disgust. I was trapped in a cycle of self-loathing, my mind replaying that brutal moment in front of his terrified wife and children. I could still see the shock and fear on their faces, their innocence shattered because of my need for revenge. And it crushed me. I had become the very thing I hated, violent, reckless, and monstrous. I had let my pain twist me into something unrecognizable. And for what? Hurting him didn't take away my pain. It only added another layer to the hell I was already living in. The days that followed were heavy, suffocating me with their weight. I barely left the house. I barely spoke to Kate. She tried to help, tried to support me, but it didn't matter. I couldn't forgive myself, and no amount of her comfort could change that. Even though I knew he had almost killed me, I couldn't let go of the shame I felt for attacking him in front of his family, for being part of a nightmare they would never forget. I had stained myself with the very blood I had sought to avenge. I heard from him again. He called several times, in fact, but I couldn't pick up the phone. The thought of hearing his voice made my stomach churn. I didn't have the courage to face what I had done, to face him. Each call was a reminder of the destruction I had caused, not only to him, but to myself. So, I ignored the calls. I let them pile up, the weight of each misconnection pressing down on me like a stone on my chest. Kate stood by me through it all. She was patient, soft-spoken, trying her best to be the anchor I so desperately needed. Despite everything that had happened, the betrayal, the lies, I had somehow found a way to forgive her. It hadn't come easily, but I couldn't deny that a part of me still loved her, that I needed her now more than ever. She was the only person who understood the depth of my pain, because she was part of it. But no matter how much I forgave her, I couldn't forgive myself. It was Kate who suggested we see a therapist together. I resisted at first, too proud, too broken, but deep down, I knew I needed help. I couldn't keep spiraling like this. I couldn't keep carrying the burden of my guilt without drowning in it. So, reluctantly, I agreed. We found a therapist who specialized in couples therapy and trauma, and the sessions were hard. I didn't like talking about it, didn't like peeling back the layers of everything that had happened, but it was necessary. Each session felt like wading through quicksand, slow and exhausting, but bit by bit, I started to feel a shift. After about 2 weeks of therapy, something changed. I wasn't healed by any means, but the suffocating weight began to lift, if only a little. Kate and I were talking more openly, and for the first time since everything happened, I didn't feel like I was walking through a fog every minute of the day. I could breathe again, even if it was just for moments at a time. And in those moments, I felt hope. It was fragile, but it was there. Then, just as the smallest sliver of light began to creep into my life, something unexpected happened. One morning, Kate woke up sick. At first, I thought it was just a stomach bug. She'd been up all night, vomiting and pale, her body weak. I didn't think much of it at first, but as the day went on, her condition didn't improve. She could barely keep water down, and I began to worry. The nausea wasn't letting up, and her energy was completely drained. I knew something was wrong, so I insisted we go to the hospital. We arrived at the emergency room, and after what felt like an eternity of waiting and tests, the doctor came in with news that neither of us expected. "Congratulations," he said with a smile. "You're pregnant." For a moment, time seemed to stop. I stared at him, the words taking a second too long to register in my mind. "Pregnant?" I turned to Kate, who looked equally stunned. We had been trying for a baby for a while, but after everything that had happened, we hadn't thought much about it. And now, in the middle of this nightmare, there was this miracle. A flood of emotions hit me all at once. Joy, disbelief, relief, so many feelings tangled together that I didn't know what to do with them. But more than anything, I felt hope. Real, tangible hope. A chance to start fresh, to build something new. After all the pain, all the betrayal, here was this life, this future that had suddenly opened up before us. The doctor told us Kate was about a month pregnant. 1 month. A new beginning that neither of us had expected but desperately needed. I felt something inside me that had been long buried begin to stir. A sense of purpose, a sense of direction. We were going to have a baby. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I smiled. Truly smiled. A few days had passed since the life-changing news. We were having a baby. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Couldn't stop imagining the future. The crib, the tiny clothes, the late-night feedings. It was like a light had been reignited inside me. For the first time in months, I felt hope, genuine hope, and I clung to it like a lifeline. But as the days went by, I began to notice something strange. Kate wasn't sharing in the joy the way I was. There was an edge to her, a nervousness that kept creeping in. At first, I chalked it up to normal pregnancy nerves. After everything we had been through, maybe she was struggling to adjust to the sudden change, just like I was. But as the days stretched into a week, it became clear that something else was bothering her. I could see it in her eyes when she looked at me, this flicker of guilt, this hesitation that lingered between us. She tried to hide it, but I knew her too well. There was something she was keeping from me. I didn't press her, didn't want to break the fragile peace we had rebuilt. But the suspicion gnawed at me, inching closer to the surface with every passing day. One evening, I was sitting on the couch, watching some mindless movie trying to relax. Kate was hovering in the doorway, shifting her weight from foot to foot. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her wringing her hands, her face pale. I paused the movie and turned to her confused. "Kate, what's going on?" I asked, my stomach tightening as I saw the expression on her face. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she took a deep breath, her shoulders shaking, her eyes glossing over with tears. "Please, please don't yell," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of whatever she was about to say. My heart immediately dropped. The anxiety in her voice sent a chill down my spine. "What's wrong?" I said, trying to keep my voice calm, but the fear was already rising inside me. She walked toward me slowly, her whole body trembling, and sat down beside me. She was crying now, unable to stop the tears that fell silently down her cheeks. "I want to tell you something, but don't shout," she stammered, her voice so quiet that I could barely hear it. "Kate," I said, my chest tightening, "just tell me, what's going on?" She took another breath, struggling to find the words, and when they finally came, they hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. "The baby, it might not be yours." My mind froze. For a moment, it felt like everything around me stopped. The air, the room, my heart. I couldn't breathe. My entire world tilted violently. The fragile joy I had been clinging to crumbling in an instant. "What?" I managed to choke out, barely able to get the word past the lump in my throat. She sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to tell you. It happened that night at the party. I was drunk. I don't even remember most of it, but I know I slept with him." My heart slammed in my chest, my pulse roaring in my ears. Every ounce of rage, betrayal, and despair that I had buried came rushing back in an instant, hitting me with a force so strong it made me physically sick. "No," I muttered, standing up so fast that the room spun. "No, no, 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 no." I couldn't contain it. The emotions crashed over me like a tidal wave, and before I even realized what I was doing, my fist flew through the air and smashed into the TV, sending glass shattering across the room. I screamed, an animalistic sound of raw pain and fury, as I punched the broken screen again and again. "Damn it! Damn it! Damn it!" Kate screamed too, sobbing uncontrollably, but I couldn't even hear her. I couldn't see anything but the chaos in my mind. The betrayal, the lies, the fact that the child I had been so happy about might not even be mine. The room blurred around me as I collapsed to my knees, gasping for air, my fists bleeding from the broken glass. I sat there, trembling, my world shattered once again. The next morning, we went to the hospital. Neither of us had slept. The atmosphere between us was thick with tension, the silence unbearable. We gave our samples for the DNA test, and then came the hardest part, waiting. The nurse told us it would take 7 days to get the results. 7 days that felt like 7 lifetimes. I couldn't look at Kate. I could barely bring myself to speak to her. Every time I saw her face, all I could think about was that man. The way I had found them together, the way he had taken everything from me. And now this, the possibility that his child was growing inside my wife. It broke me in ways I didn't think were possible. Those 7 days were torture. I spent most of them in silence, barely able to function. Kate tried to reach out to me, tried to apologize, but the words felt empty. I couldn't get past the idea that the baby, the one thing that had given me hope, might not even be mine. I barely slept. I barely ate. All I did was wait, hoping and praying that the universe would show me mercy. Finally, the day came. The letter with the DNA results arrived, and my hands shook as I opened the envelope. Kate stood beside me, crying, her body trembling with fear. This was it. This was the moment that could either destroy me completely or pull me back from the edge. I opened the letter, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. For a moment, I couldn't even read the words. My vision blurred, my hands trembling as I stared at the paper. And then finally I saw it. There is a 99.9% chance that you are the father of this child. My heart stopped, and for a second, I couldn't believe it. I read the words again and again until they sank in. The baby was mine. I dropped the letter and collapsed onto the couch, my whole body shaking with relief. Kate fell to her knees beside me, sobbing uncontrollably. I hugged her, holding her as tightly as I could, the weight of the past few weeks crashing down on us both. The nightmare was over. The child was mine. In that moment, I knew what we had to do. We couldn't stay here, couldn't live in this house filled with memories of betrayal and pain. We had to leave, start fresh. So, we made the decision to sell everything we owned and move to a new city, a place where we could rebuild, where we could start over, just the two of us and the child we would bring into the world. It wouldn't be easy. The scars would always be there. But we had a second chance. And for the first time in a long time,